This video is brought to you by Squarespace. Welcome back, everyone. It is time once again. We are going to look at some viewer work today. I mentioned in the last couple mail videos that this may be the last year that we're going to do the mail time videos. It's just, I've done it for a long time, and I think that it needs to evolve into something else. That being said, though, there's still half a year left, so if you want to send me something, I would encourage you to do it sooner than later. We still have some time. But let's go ahead and get to some projects today. The first one I want to start with is really cool, and this is something that's very different. You know, when you consider the kind of styles of photography that we typically cover on here, I mean, you know, there's obviously street photography, there's portrait photography, there's landscape photography. Those are kind of the big ones. And then people get into some niche things like, you know, macro or product photography. Today, I'm going to start things off with a photographer who sent something in that is very impressive, and it deals with a little bit more of a difficult subject. So this is a book that comes to us from a German photographer by the name of Detlef Henrichs. He sent this in. He also sent a very long letter, which I'm not going to read you the whole thing. He goes into a lot of his background here, and he's got a very impressive resume. So this particular project is called Narben, which translates to scars. It is a series of images of burn victims. These were all done on 8x10 film cameras. It's really impressive. I'm going to read you part of the intro to this book. It says, "The basis for this work was the last surgery I had, a year and a half before I took the first photograph in the Narben series. It was the most painful operation and long. It was on my hands, and there was a smaller operation on my face. I decided that this was the last attempt at making me quote-unquote look better. I said, stop. I'm not going to do this surgery for myself. I was doing it for society. They make me want to look better, but that's not the future that I want. Photography began at this point because I could now photograph myself. Now it's society's turn to deal with it." Henrichs' work is fundamentally different. Simply, he de-freaks. He celebrates these people who, of course, do live next door, do live amongst us, but who have been denied their right visual place. His normalizing aesthetic stands against the gaze of segregation, of ignoring, or forgetting. But in the final analysis, it's up to us to make the perceptual shift. The misrepresentation of scarring and deformity through the ages has been hideous and has left a taste of gentle and sometimes hostile non-acceptance within our society. Injuries of any description need not to be seen as ugly, but revealing in their honesty. They are marks of existence, of experience, and of life. And in case you're wondering, the self-portrait in here is this one. That's a self-portrait of Detlef and his wife, Silke. So a couple things that I want to say about it. First of all, this work is incredible, and Detlef did get a Kodak Award for the first series of self-portraits that he did that started this whole series of Narben. A couple years ago, I did a video called Work That Matters, and it's interesting because I did several videos kind of in this vein around that time, but they addressed the feeling that I think we all have as photographers where we become frustrated, or people, what is the response to our images? What are we getting out of this crazy hobby that we all indulge in? You develop skills, you get better, and to what end? And when I did that video, I was trying to illustrate that the importance is doing things that actually matter. It's not about really anything else, and I can't think of a better example of work that matters than this. It's really interesting because when I did that video, I had a lot of people that left in the comments, well, what does work that matters mean? Well, you've got to find out what that means for yourself. You got to do something that's very personal, and you got to do something that means something. And I think this is a prime example of that. And I also think it's worth noting in here that in the course of his letter, Detlef did admit to me that even though he had a pretty successful career as a commercial photographer, he's done fine art like this, and he's had an enormous amount of success, that he actually left photography at one point to go on and do other businesses. It's a tough business, and it's a tough pursuit that I think that we all take on with this. And I'm sharing that with you because I think that that makes him very real as a person. And he's recently got back into it, and he's going back through and editing some of his older work. And Detlef, I wish you all the luck in the world on this. I'm going to link to his website and where you can get this book. I highly recommend it. I think this is really important. I think it's really cool. It's really well done. And all the people that have sent stuff in, as usual, I will link everybody in the description below. So make sure you check them out. Detlef, thank you for sending. This is very moving and absolutely incredible. All right, so next up is this little zine that comes to us from the UK. This is from Bob Griffiths. Bob also includes a note, which reads, "Ted, enclosed is a copy of Car Park, my first zine, which is a small collection of images from a 1960s structure in my hometown of Shrewsbury. It may not mean a lot to people, as it's generally considered to be a concrete carbuncle on the medieval landscape, but I still find beauty in the way that light enters, reflects, casts shadows around the strange and unusual surroundings. The images within are created using 35 and medium format film, digital, and even drone cameras. I'm very interested in brutalism, post-war modernism styled buildings, and looking to get out and about with my selection of cameras to document the unseen beauty in these once modern, now unsightly structures around the UK and perhaps beyond. I hope you enjoy looking at something from the UK, as there are relatively few in your mailbag videos compared to other locations. Many thanks and best wishes for the future, Bob. So Bob, thank you for sharing this zine. I want to point out a couple things that I think will help all of us to learn from this. This is really excellent. And a couple things that I like about this is, first of all, when you have a subject called car park, and especially for a zine format, I think this is really awesome because you're just taking something that might be mundane or might be kind of, I guess, average to, the viewing audience, and you're really exploring it. And I think that Bob has a really good sense of geometry in here. I think there's a dialogue that happens when you go across the spreads on each page. The images make sense. They speak to one another. I think this is really cool. The point that I want to make in all this, and this is what I would encourage anybody to think about with their own work when you're doing a zine, is that, if you have a location or a subject that you're shooting, in this case, the car park, he's transcending beyond the actual subject. It's not just a document of deadpan photos of car parks. This is really an exploration of the architecture that is involved, the way the light works, as he said in his letter, and I think this is really well done. And the subject ends up being the impressions the photographer is getting himself from the car park, not the car park itself. Anyway, I think it's really cool, and I want to point that out because I think that's something important that a lot of people go through. If you're dealing with a zine that has a theme to it or something, it's just kind of this documentation going through of whatever that subject is, and I love that he's really reaching beyond that. It becomes a little bit deeper. So check out Bob's work, link below. Pretty awesome. All right, I've got some more awesome stuff that I want to share with you. There's a project called Shoreline, which has some great black and white stuff, and then a project on New York City. So we're going to get to these, but real quick, I want to give a special shout out to our sponsor today, who are the awesome folks over at Squarespace. How easy is it to build an amazing website in a matter of minutes? Squarespace has you covered. It's dead simple. Head over to Squarespace, hit Get Started. You can start by selecting from an impressive collection of customizable templates, or you can do what I do, build your own. Something unique because, you're not like other websites. Give your site a name. Next, you can build your homepage. We'll start with a few preset layouts just to get us going. Want to sell products like books or prints? Well, you can feature those on your homepage. Create a few more sections if you want. Let's also give it a color palette. There's a whole bunch to choose from, and just get us started. We can change this all later. Next, let's select the typography choices. Welcome to your website. Everything is set up and it's all ready for you to customize. Squarespace is built on Fluid Engine, the next generation of website design. Select Edit, and Fluid Engine allows you to drag, place, and resize any element on the page. You can snap these to a grid, you can make them float on top of one another, you can freeform however you like. You can even preview and adjust how the site looks on either desktop or mobile. The layouts are independent. Of course, you'll want a portfolio for your work. Creating an image gallery is as easy as dropping a folder of images on your web browser. Once uploaded, you can drag to resort, customize the look, and Squarespace writes all of the code for you. Everything just works and it looks fabulous. Want to sell your own prints, books, or zines? Squarespace has the capabilities to not only set up your online store and collect payments, but they also give you all the tools that you're going to need to be successful. Managing shipping and payment options, manage your orders, and engage with your customers. They even give you the tax tools that you need to keep things organized and stay compliant. You should try Squarespace for yourself. It's absolutely free, no credit card required. Just go to squarespace.com/AOP, sign up for that free trial. If you decide Squarespace is right for you, I can save you an additional 10% on your order by using offer code AOP on checkout. That's right, the code is AOP. So stop procrastinating, go build your website today. And I want to give a special shout out and thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. All right, so next up is this book called Shoreline. This is a wonderful collection of black and white photography that comes to us from Malek Bigham, who is a 21-year-old photographer from Copenhagen. Malek also includes a note which reads, "Dear Ted Forbes, I made this little book in my second semester at Copenhagen Film and Photo School. My first love of photography began a long time ago and has been centered around documentary photography, which is what I usually do. I dove down in my archive and looked at all the photos I took between the quote-unquote real photos and discovered that I have a lot of photos where one can feel a little bit lonely. Then I learned about the word solitude, which is a word used to describe the feeling of being alone in a positive way. In Danish, we don't have a word that describes that feeling in a positive way, but only in a negative way, which I found interesting. I then began to shoot a lot when I was by myself, but also when I was with my friends. I think it is interesting that you can be surrounded by a lot of people but still feel alone in your mind. It was very difficult to take that feeling I had inside me to photograph it because a feeling like that was never really to be seen. I'm not sure I'll ever finish this project, but I learned a lot about photography, a lot about myself. It's amazing what feelings a little film camera loaded with some Tri-X 400 can provoke, and the amount that you can learn from it. I hope that you like the book, and I've been following you since I picked up my first camera, and you've always been an inspiration to me. Best regards, Malek. Okay, so a couple observations on Shoreline. First of all, one of the things that Malek says in his letter here is that he is 21, and I'm very impressed because I was not photographing like this at 21. I think that at a young age like that, to take on a subject that you're really exploring in this type of form and even doing a publication on is a very mature way to go. And I think it's going to be really exciting to see how he improves over time. A couple things that I want to make note on this and maybe possibly critique. I did emphasize the word provoke in the letter. And I don't know if Malek is influenced necessarily by Provoke magazine, which was a Japanese publication or a series of publications that came out in the 1960s. Daido Moriyama is most associated with that. And it has a lot of this kind of borderline abstract loose style to it. And it's kind of beyond the scope in here to get into Provoke. It's something I've never really covered on the channel. But I find it interesting, and I want to make a couple notes on some of the direction this is going in. So one of the things that I like on this is the way that abstractions work with just general shapes, the way that light hits. Shots like this that are not in focus necessarily because there's a lot of motion blur, it's very low light. I think those work. Now, what I think the problem is sometimes when you get into this style is it's real easy to, one, start playing to the medium of film when there's nothing wrong with that, but you have to remember as an artist, you still have a responsibility as the photographer onto that medium. And some of the shots that get abstract in here are a little too abstract. Case in point would be a spread like this, where you have very, very low light, and you've obviously got some kind of landscape, but there's really not enough information here to tell me what this is. Now, that could work in context to some of the spreads around it, but at this point in the zine, it's just getting really abstract. And so one of the things that I would encourage you to do is try to play in a little more reality, and it's going to require you to slow down a little bit, because I know a lot of these shots are kind of from the hip and they're off the cuff. But I think that would make a huge difference in trying to communicate what it is that you're going for with this whole idea of solitude. Even on the next page, we kind of have a similar problem, and then that it's interesting, it's an interesting idea, and it leads the viewer to try to figure out what this is, but for my taste, it's just a little too out there. Now, one thing that's interesting, and it's like nothing else in this entire book, is this one spread where you can make out the people that are silhouetted up on the top here, you've got the water below, and so we have that sense of what is real in the image versus the abstract, and then you still have the hard contrast. And so what's interesting to me is this is the only shot like this in the entire book, so you kind of break up a lot of the motion blur type stuff with this. And I think this would be a direction to go in to try to explore some of that juxtaposition between what is real and then what is really abstract. And you're going to have to find a way to do that in context too. And that's a little beyond the scope here of what I can critique. But I would like to see more of that. Sometimes you get into this groove where it's just so abstract and you get a lot of that it's, I try to find, it's hard for me to figure out what I'm looking at, so if that makes sense. And one other thing you might consider too is the whole idea of exploring this idea of solitude is not necessarily new in photography. There have been a lot of photographers historically who have kind of explored this idea. And so I think it would be interesting to go back and look at photographers like Dave Heath or even somebody modern like Michael Kenna to see how they do it. You don't have to copy that style. I think you've got your own thing going on here, but just kind of look and see in terms of continuity how they're keeping that together and holding interest throughout the pace of a book project like this. But I think you're onto something. I think it's going to be really interesting to see where you go with this. You mentioned in here you don't know if this project will ever end, and I think that's probably a good thing. I would keep exploring, and if you're going to continue to do it, don't just continue to do it. Try to push yourself a little harder. I think it's a great start. I love the title. I think Shoreline is great for this, and anyway, it's some really strong stuff in here. I think there's just some room for improvement. So anyway, awesome work, Malek. Thank you for sharing. Okay, so next up is a project on New York City, and this is a zine. It really feels more like a magazine, but it's very cool. This comes to us from a gentleman named Dinesh Harjani. Dinesh includes a note which reads, "Dear Mr. Forbes, regarding my book, My Week with New York, I don't consider myself a travel photographer. 99% of my photography work is portraiture. But last year, my dad kept insisting that we had to do something special to celebrate my 35th birthday and kept mentioning the Big Apple. Tired of his constant messages, I was on the phone with my travel agent for a different trip later that year, and I decided to solve the matter by asking for a travel quote to New York. The end result was the price was too expensive for my dad, but I just said, forgive the phrase, F it, you only live once. It was never my intention to make a book out of the trip. I had never even made a zine or a photo book until now, but inspired by your channel and every single one of your viewers who send in their work, I decided it was worth a try. The added benefit to being able to sit down on my couch and just see the pictures with my own eyes, the texture of the printed paper between my fingertips, would be enough to transport me back from the comfort of my home. As I've gotten older, moved to my own apartment, and hung up my own shots on the wall, I've realized that there's a big truth behind the common saying of print your own work. And I also like the idea of having a definite answer whenever one asks, you went to New York? Where are your pictures then? Lastly, there's one piece of advice that I'd like to give anyone thinking about visiting New York City for the first time, which is to simply let the city happen to you. It took me a few days to understand that New York is not like other places in the world, or the US for that matter. There's point A, point B on the map, but little else in between. New York is not like that. New York is what happens when you're going from point A to point B. Whether you attach yourself to the ride the city is offering you, that's your choice. But if you allow it, the city will take care of you. Thanks for your help, Ted. I'm looking forward to more of your videos. Your avid subscriber, Dinesh. Okay, Dinesh, this looks really awesome. I do want to give a couple critiques on this. A couple things that I really like about it. First of all, I love the fact that you went to a new place and decided that it was worth photographing and tried to document that. And I think that's awesome. I love the way that this format is set up. It's sort of a travel log where you have the date followed by a series of images that cover that point in time. The interesting thing about this, and I want to point this out, is for one, I think that you're using a lot of wide-angle lenses in this, which is not a problem necessarily, but the types of photos that you're taking, they're New York City. We've seen them before. And the only reason I'm saying that is one thing you mentioned in your letter that your advice that you're giving others if they're going to photograph New York is about point A to point B, and what happens in between. And I'm not getting a whole lot of sense out of this. I mean, I'm seeing where all you went, and I'm seeing what days you went on. But I would encourage you to try to focus in, no pun intended, or focal in a little bit closer. Use slightly longer lenses, even just do it with a 50. I think the wide-angle lens tends to get the touristy kinds of shots, and there's nothing wrong with that. The other thing is I would encourage you to, when you're putting together a book like this, is thin it out. You don't have to include everything you've got in here. For example, when you get on the top of a landmark building and you've got an incredible skyline, and if you've never been up here, for those of you who haven't, it is breathtaking and it's unbelievable. But what I'm getting here is inclusion of lots of different shots at different times of the day as the sun goes down, and they're all included in here. And I think you could do some thinning out, and you know, we all shoot that way because we're trying to get the best time and the best angle and the shot that works. But I think the one that you want to deliver in the end is the one that has the most impact. When you have more around it and you're just kind of including everything, then it just kind of weakens the intention. Now, look, your intention may have been just to have a memento of your trip to New York City, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I'm just saying, in the case of a zine or something that you might publish or you might make available to other people, that's one thing that I would be cautious about. One aspect of this that I find really interesting, though, is in the middle, he does an inclusion at a wax museum of a bunch of fake celebrities here, which I think is interesting, and this could be a whole book unto itself if it were done in kind of this conceptual, kind of quirky way. If you go look at stuff like photographers like Hiroshi Sugimoto, who did two different projects. There was one on dioramas at like natural history museums that were done in kind of this surrealistic way, and there was another one he did on wax portraits like this. And maybe there's a way of getting in tighter and just showing a portion of this rather than shooting them all portrait style that would be very interesting, I think. But either way, I love that you documented this whole thing, and I think that is important right there. There's so many photographers who set out to do stuff, and they set out to get better, and they set out to make content that they want to share, and they never print it, or they never put it together as a zine. And I'm sure that there was a lot you learned just in doing this. And I'm just giving you some tips that you could take it to the next level on the next trip. And this is the other thing, is it doesn't have to be something like New York City. I realize that there's some places in the world that, you know, are far from home and they seem exotic and they're kind of pricey to go to. You could do this in your own backyard. It's about capturing something about the environment that you're in. And I think that's very difficult to do, and it's a skill that you really have to work at. It's one thing to shoot everything with the wide angle lens and you get it all in. That has a certain effect to it. And there's another thing to explore, and I'm going to bring it back to your letter because it is about what happens between point A and point B. And it's about that dialogue that happens in there. So I would love to see you explore this again from a different angle, so to speak. So anyway, Dinesh, thank you for sending. This is awesome. And thanks to everybody who who sent stuff in today. Remember to check the show description for more information and support your colleagues. And I will see you guys in the next video. Until then, later.